What's up, everyone? And welcome to the third episode of Super Brain Radio, where we're talking about respiration. And it's a funny start to the episode today, guys, because it's a little nihilistic. It's not meant to be, of course. But when we're talking about something as integral to life as respiration and milking it for all we can from an ROI standpoint, it's going to force us to zoom out, pretty far. And I hope you already have figured out that's just how I roll. So it is what it is. But the first one is the worst disease in humanity, and this was pretty ubiquitous amongst philosophers when they talked about it, is Odin's curse. So it's the part of your brain that manages the automatic function of respiration and breathing gets damaged and can only function consciously. And if you just take a moment to maybe even pause this and think about what that means, you start to realize how big of a deal it is. So much so that no one's even made it out of adolescence. Because unfortunately, while you sleep, that's when this automatic function of respiring is. Shined its light because you don't need to consciously think about your breathing patterns while you sleep. It's done for you. But with Odin's curse, you very much have to do that. So essentially, you either die of psychosis due to lack of sleep or you asphyxiate while you sleep. And anything in between is, not really a quality of life either. So it is what it is. Luckily, it's incredibly, incredibly uncommon. Happens during the embryonic portion of things. So it is something that I believe they can detect. I actually might be a disease that's even kind of like fizzled out of modern day humanity. But hey, somebody Google it and let me know. It's something I've known about for quite a while. I think I learned about that in college philosophy along the way somewhere. Just, me being me and like going somewhere in a rabbit hole reading something. Next on our nihilistic examples to start is the fact that pretty much from that embryonic period till death, especially when we talk about it from a chemistry standpoint, we're on this like unidirectional chemical cascade that only goes, like I said, kind of towards death. It's not a bad thing. That's just the nature of chemistry. We are essentially almost never ending reaction. The reaction just ends, somewhere around 100 years, more or less, these days. But even when you're in that embryonic period, we have atherosclerotic plaque beginning to build and all this stuff. It's essentially nothing more than a plight for the fact that there is a small, small, small cost for being the human being that we are, and that's going in one direction. We can attenuate it for obviously like 100 years almost, but it's just part of the process. And the reason it's really important for us to start is because breathing is the ultimate tool of efficiency for the human body. And it's funny because it's actually not even the breathing itself, it's actually the immediate baton passing that happens after the breath. And it's a chemical change that's happening, in fact. And that's what makes it such a special, special thing. And that's what actually is the forward motion and movement in the chemical reaction from birth till death. What makes it cool is that the chemical reaction I referenced is constantly, constantly, constantly doing something, and not just something, it should be some things, in parentheses, because that's not grammatically correct. But you get what I'm saying. So, this is the actual kerosene that keeps the fire going chemically. And I think it's easiest to start to wrap our heads around that when we talk about the difference in ventilation and respiration in dogs versus humans. So, right off the bat, the difference in those terms, ventilation and respiration, are just like kind of umbrella concept I've referenced in the past. Respiration has to do with the mechanical, chemical, and everything involved with the breath itself, whereas ventilation is just referencing the mechanical portions, like a vent. At least it makes sense to me. Hopefully, it does to you guys as well now. But for example, you hear your dog play or whatever other pet you may have, and you'll notice that it breathes funny when it's excited. Whether it's gently excited or exuberantly excited, it's pretty much the same breathing, it just speeds up. And to make sense of it, you need to briefly understand that air does not travel in straight lines, nor does light, but light will get its own episode. air travels in this 3D circumventory way. So it's kind of going in like a spiral circle in all three dimensions. And that's why dogs have to breathe the way they do. They only have one proper layer of musculature for trunk dynamics, meaning like their trunk, their body, if you will, not their appendages. So their six-pack muscles that protect them and allow their trunk to contract also happen to be their breathing tissues. So when they're doing a task that's physical, there's only one muscular system to do many, many jobs. Humans are miraculous because they can typically, if they're trained to and hopefully inherently do, use many different breathing patterns. And that's because our thorax, our trunk, our main body, if you will, or axial skeleton, if you know that term, is going to be multi-layered and dynamic in what trunk muscles do what. So we have IOs and TAs, internal obliques and transverse abdominis, that have to do with specific breathing. Then we have certain people, or muscles if you will, that have real estate for breathing in communication with the hips, doing it with the shoulder. When I describe the appendages to people in anatomy, I talk about the trunk being a balloon, and the thickness of the skin of the balloon is determined by the quality of the respiration. Now, appendages are clip-on ties. If you want to put a clip-on tie on a balloon properly, you better hope the balloon has thick enough skin to allow that tie to move. Because if not, when you attach the tie, either the balloon pops or the tie is just going to be sitting there. If you want the tie to be able to move on this thicker skin balloon, you need degrees of change in the skin, in the movement of the air, so it's not rigid at all times. And if you can imagine that in your head, you might have to rewind it once or twice. It makes a lot more sense how you can fix so many hip and shoulder ailments by looking at respiration. It's really, really cool, but inherently, all you need to remember from that little story is don't breathe like a dog, breathe like a human. Humans have many opportunities to breathe. So, what I mean is, when you're relaxing or when you're just doing light work, something that's not very emotionally driven or intent or demanding, you're going to want to try to nasal breathe when you can. Keep your mouth shut and let the air flow slowly in and out at the same rough pace through your nose. However, if you're maybe exercising and it's something heavy breathing, maybe it's something a little aggressive, something that requires force, not only should you certainly be breathing out your mouth, you should probably determine a cadence and a force that you should breathe out your mouth with that is synergistic with the task at hand. It's not just being able to, oh, belly breathe this or that. It's more so, just like sports in general, and realistically life in general, being able to use the right tool for the right job. So I've spoken to long distance runners before, and based on where they feel certain things, not based on where they perform the best, where they feel certain things, is actually where I place my assessments on where we need to modulate their sports biology. Because obviously, you're not going to get tired out of nowhere in any sport or any task, even if it's just sitting at emails. You're not going to get tired out of nowhere. Something's going to happen a couple minutes beforehand. And if we look, a couple minutes before that, that's when respiration tends to matter. So when you want to start to figure out, oh, what's this breathing structure I should look at? What should patterns, cadence, rhythm, Andy? I don't know anymore. What are you even talking about? Don't get too complicated, too pent up in it. You can spend your whole life being obsessed with breathing and get almost nothing out of it. Your goal with breathing ROIs is to put as minimal into it as possible, have that minimal be 100% correct, and then try to make that as subliminal, passive, subconscious, whatever you identify with, as possible, so that you're putting next to nothing into it and actually getting something valuable out of it. So, like I said, start with something as simple as nasal breathing or mouth breathing, and then kind of break it down. So, if I'm doing nasal breathing, I could do it super, super chill. But what about things that are in between, like walking the dog or like light exercise or yoga? Maybe you want to push that barrier of how much can I do with my nasal breathing before I have to change. And then for the opposite, now when you are exercising, how specific can you get with your mouth breathing when necessary? And also, how quickly can you return to nasal breathing if needed? Actually, in a really vague and simple way, I just described the concepts and philosophies behind heart rate variability. Briefly, for those of you that care, and I think everyone should be at least be aware of it, we have four sections of our heart. We have a left and a right, and we have a top and a bottom. The portions on the top, called the atria, are really just elastic rubber bands that are trying to pass the ball, aka the blood, from the muscular contractile portion, which are the ventricles underneath, and pass it into the vasculature. Both of these guys, the ventricles and the atria, have different jobs that are synergistic with each other, and their relationship is what heart health really is. So, lastly, this was a pretty conceptual one, but something that everyone can apply. But you still need some type of buoy of objectivity when you're at sea, because you don't want to just sit there nasal breathing, mouth breathing, not knowing what's going on, and hope for the best, because one day your brain's going to fail you in that sense. So, go ahead, whether you go on Amazon or whatever it is, Alibaba, whatever part of the country or the world you're in, because we're actually represented in 15 countries right now, so there's quite a few of you out there. Grab yourself a pulse oximeter. Pretty much no matter what, it's the cheapest medical device you can buy, and it's going to give you a reading on your finger based on infrared, laser, and light technology, depending on the quality of the one you get. But don't worry about quality, these are all pretty solid. It's going to give you a reading of your SpO2, or oxygen saturation, and your heart rate. Now, it's going to make the most sense for you guys to reference these little bulleted texts that I gave you, because you might not remember this off the top of your head, but use the pulse oximeter to tell you and try to inference what is my current state from an excitability standpoint when it comes to breathing and ventilation, and where do I want to be? Along the way, I strongly recommend you log it, and also in your own head, or log this as well, record what the correlation was and how you felt, more importantly. So, maybe you were just chilling doing some work and you put on your pulse oximeter and you saw a triple digit heart rate. It's like, wow, not only is that probably not good, I had no idea. I felt totally normal. And then do that in the AM, the PM, and everything in between. Start by accumulating data and figure out a normal curve for you. Do not let yourself be under the assumption that your average heart rate even really exists. Just like most normative mean values with large amounts of data, the mean doesn't necessarily always exist. It's a mathematical number and data point that can be useful, but that doesn't mean it's actually a point on your data graph. So, don't worry about the means. Look for means within time frames. What's my morning average? What's my PM average? My after the gym, after studying, whatever it may be that you do, find your average for that emotional task time of day range, and then within those categories start to pay attention. So maybe you notice you're lethargic and you don't want to be as in tune with the work and responsibilities that you have to be, right? You know, this can be a crucial portion of how to manage that. Let's say you do it and you notice that your oxygen's kind of low, your heart rate can be low, high, or medium, but you just notice oxygen's low. It's like, wow, maybe I need a meditation. You meditate real quick, or you take a few minutes to yourself just to calmly nasal breathe, and you take it again. And the oxygen went up, but the heart rate isn't something that's favorable for you. Maybe you have to get work done. The heart rate's a little bit low. That's all right to maybe grab some caffeine, maybe listen to some music, or maybe do something excitatory. The same way, if you're supposed to be relaxing and you see a heart rate value that's very high, you should probably go out of your way to maybe grab something that helps you relax and pair that with a relaxing behavior to ensure you get that change. All in all, guys, remember it's always going to be about ROI. And secondly, how little are you able to put in and still get the same return out of it? I hope you guys enjoy these, and we'll talk next Sunday.